So I want to welcome all of you guys to the Grace Gallery. Thank you so much for coming. And I also want to welcome our guests. So in order, this is Khary Randolph. All of the work that you see around you is his work. And Khary is Boston-born and Brooklyn-based. He graduated from the School of Visual Arts in 2000 with a BFA in cartooning and illustration. Randolph's a veteran of the comic book and animation industries and has applied his unique vision to a number of high-profile projects for some of the biggest media companies in the world. He's worked on properties such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Voltron, X-Men, Spider-Man, Boondocks, Teen Titans, to name a few. He is currently the co-creator of Excellence, that's the work you can see right behind you, from Image Comics, and he is the main cover artist for Black from Black Mask Studios. And right next to him, Kwanza Osajyefo. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Oh, that was for him.
Yeah, I was like, wait.
Delayed clap.
Do we want one for Kwanza too? Yeah.
No.
No way. I made it also a transitional.
So Kwanza, I'm gonna ask you to be careful to tell me that.
Oh, I said it wrong too. Oh, I've been thinking
This is all a learning experience. All right. So Kwanza is the author creator of Black. You see right behind you. And it's a comic that asks, what if only Black people had superpowers? Kwanza has been part of the comics industry for nearly 20 years. He's beginning his let's take a second of that. Beginning his career as an online producer at Marvel before moving on to other media roles. He's later returned to comics and launched DC Comics digital publishing initiatives. In addition to creating his own properties, Kwanza is the creative architect of H1 Comics lines from the premier French publisher Humanoids, co-writing their flagship title Ignited with comics legend Mark Waid. Guys, don't be shy. Come on in. Let's just make it all happen.
Back away, so you can go on the chairs.
Wow.
Get to the wall.
There's a room on the side. Supposed to have a room on the side.
I introduce you guys to Joe Illidge. Joe is the editorial director for A Wave Blue World, working with creators from the comic book and global entertainment industries to develop books celebrating inclusion and heroism. He's a world builder with experience in high-profile characters, universe development, and Joe was featured in the 2017 History Channel documentary series, Superheroes Decoded. He's discussed popular icons from Batman to Luke Cage. In his career, he served as an editor for the Batman line of books for DC, an executive editor for Valiant Entertainment Universe, and a senior editor for Lion Forge Comics, where he spearheaded Catalyst Prime, the multicultural superhero comic book imprint. Joe's first job in the comic book industry was at Milestone Media, and he creating inclusive superhero stories and the award-winning animated series Static Shock from Warner Brothers. Not a bad lineup at all. And my name is Sarah Woolley Gomez, and I am a professor here at City Tech of illustration, and I am also the Grace Gallery director. We have our chair, Doug Davis, over there. And so many ComD students. I'm so excited to see you guys here. So here's what we're going to do. I have a set of questions that I'm going to go ahead and ask and spark some discussion, but also please be thinking about your own questions because I'm going to leave the last 15 to 20 minutes of this discussion open for Q&A from the audience.
Can I just really quickly say, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for our panel, for having time. I'm really grateful that we can have these types of conversations here in Brooklyn. Every time a Black man or a Black person gets shot in their own home or something happens and they were unarmed, I always post on Facebook that one day it'll be me because I'm also Black and I didn't do anything and I also have a home. So overall, my family gets so angry at me because I'm like, one day it'll be me. And yet, if I don't do that to make it personal, then we can't even have this conversation that's happening all around us and that we all know is happening. So I'm not saying that that's what the panel is going to be about, but I love the fact that in this medium, it continues the tradition of challenging certain ideas. It continues the tradition of having certain conversations that we haven't been able to have seriously in other venues. So I'm so glad that we can have a department and that we can have an environment that we can have these conversations openly. So I invite your questions for our panelists. It's a treat to have them here, and I'm just so thankful that you all came. So with that, I want to throw it back.
So I'm not going to use a mic because I think everybody can hear me. But there is a mic for your field trips. So if you guys want to pass it back and forth, right.
All right.
So my first question to you guys, what was it that first got you into comics in general? And what was the first image or character that you encountered that you felt you could relate to?
All right. Well, I guess it's like booming right now. Okay. Since I got the mic, I guess I'll start. I don't know if I had the traditional comic book upbringing. I didn't get into comics until I was like maybe 12 or 13. They were always around, and I always saw them, but it was things like, it was other mediums that got me in. So like, I got into Ninja Turtles through the cartoon. I got into Batman through the movie. There's always things like that that brought me close to comics, but not really into comics. And when I was 13, I found out about Image Comics, and there was something about the energy in those books and the colors and it was like a youthful vibe that spoke to me on a level that made me say, I need to go into the comic book shop and see what this is all about. And once I went in, I had $20 in my pocket. I spent all $20. It was nothing. And then I was back there the next week with another $20. And it was just like I was just caught up. It was like the first time I loved like anything. And within a couple months of reading those comic books and getting fully invested, I was just like, I think I want to do this for a living. And it's kind of been that one consistent thing in my life since, was just creating new worlds, creating new things, and pushing the medium forward as much as I could.
It's funny, somebody just asked me this in another interview, and I had to go like way back, because I started reading comics when I was very, very young, like 2 or 3. But the character that I identified with immediately was Charlie Brown. Like, I got him. I was young, I was a little too serious for my age, because Charlie Brown was talking about real stuff, But that just graduated me, Peanuts graduated me to like Pogo, which graduated me to like the first periodical I ever got into was like Power Pack, because I was that age, like I was really young, and I identified with that. And it was kind of like I aged up, so then it was like New Mutants got me into X-Men, X-Men got me into, like, well, when I got into puberty, then it was all Vertigo stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think when it really locked in terms of like career was Milestone. And that was just because that was when I finally saw characters of color appear, and I was like, oh wait, this is a job. People do this stuff. I can do this. So that was sort of like, back then it was a little bit more like getting like into drugs, I guess. You got a little taste, and then you just kept coming back more, kind of like you, coming here every week with your money.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like how I got in.
Wow. So I started reading comics when I was in the 2nd grade. Back in those days, comics were sold on newsstands. Every Friday after work, my mom would take me to the newsstand, and she would buy soap opera magazines, and she would buy me comics. So in addition to being up on superheroes, I knew like all the actors and actresses' names from like All My Children, One Life to Live, all of it. And but it's crazy. Like, I've been reading comics since the 2nd grade, but in terms of a character that really nailed me, it was a character called Night Thrasher from a group called the New Warriors when I graduated from college. Because Night Thrasher was basically this young, rich black man who had people that worked for him and loved him, and he had this whole operation, and his mother and father were dead, and he led a team of young superheroes. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, that's interesting. Like, a rich black superhero, his parents are dead, like, my dad is dead, and, like, he can bring together this group of people and make a family. And that really nailed me. On a personal level, on a career level, similar to Kwanza, I found out about Milestone. They had an internship. It was advertised. I didn't know how I was going to tell my mom I wanted to work at a comic book company for free. Like, that was madness. But I told her, I was like, this is going to work out. Somehow it's going to work out. And the first day I walked in there as an intern and saw 4 black men running a comic book company with a universe of characters of different sexual orientations, different sizes, different cultures, and they weren't the sidekicks, and they didn't lack for intelligence. They didn't lack for wealth. And that's when I knew that it was actually possible. Like, this could be a career. This is not just a hobby. This is a tangible future. And that was the beginning for me.
I'm going to let you hang on to the mic because I think you guys can probably hear me. So each of you represents a different aspect of the comic book creation process. You've worked together on different projects. What do you see as your individual role, and how do these roles interact to create the final products we see all around us?
Oh, we want to reverse it now?
No, let's reverse it.
Okay, so let's reverse it. Okay. So in my present capacity, I'm an editorial director. I've been in editorial since 1995 at Milestone. And the way that happened was, I was like a lot of kids. I grew up and thinking, I want to be a comic book artist. And I've been drawing since I was a kid. That didn't work out, but then I thought, oh, okay, I want to write comics. And I kept sending in these submissions. Nothing was happening because that's not the way it works. But you don't know that when you come out of college, right? And when I went to work at Milestone, I started in the business department because at some point I thought, oh, I would like to own my own comic book company one day, so I need to know how it works. But then when I was there, one of the founders of Milestone was Dwayne McDuffie, rest in peace to him. And not only was he an amazing writer and a brilliant man, but he was the editor-in-chief. And he showed me what being an editor was. And this was a credit that I always saw in comics. And it was kind of like this annoying thing that you pass by. I didn't care about what an editor was, like who wrote it, who drew it, and maybe who colored it, right? But when he taught me what that was, and basically what an editor is in addition to making sure that the work comes out on time, in addition to making sure that it maintains a standard of quality, the job of an editor is to help all the creators be the best creator they can be. Help the writer be the best writer, help the artist be the best artist. And to remind us all that story is the most important thing. We're all fueled by our egos. Our egos are what make us get up in the morning and want to be better than the day before and want to be better than the person next to us. But story is the thing to which we must all be the servant. And knowing that, I was like, wow, there's a purpose here. And so that was the beginning of my editorial career. And that's what I still do today. It's really about helping creators be the best that they can be and all of us finding the way to the best story. And sometimes that will lead to debates and arguments and discussions, but if we all want to get to the best story, then we're on our way, and that's really the purpose.
Well, that was a nice lead up because I did the editorial thing for a while, and I respect it a lot, but I do. And here's the thing, like a lot of people in the industry have differing opinions about editors and stuff like that, but I am having, not just because of having been one, but because there's a lot of things that as a writer, I feel like I'm here to like explore the story, poke the bear, like dig and like push and stuff like that, and the editor is there to help refine and get me to like focus on certain aspects of it. So it's like for me, I'm just there to like pursue the narrative and wild out and just like try and like tell a story that, you know, I feel is provocative, that interests me. I don't personally think too much about the reader, no offense to anybody. It's like I'm just trying to like, you know, tell a story, and if it resonates with people, that's great. But like I feel like that's my primary role. It's like, what are these characters saying? What am I trying to evoke through them? Like, or am I just trying to, you know, write a dope action scene? Like it's like that's my focus, and that's where I feel my role is. And also to, you know, create something that an illustrator can actually pull from, you know, so they can actually visualize it in their head, because I tend to not be personally someone who tries to direct. I feel like that's the illustrator's job.
Sure about that?
Oh, come on. All right. Sometimes.
The fun is beginning here.
All right. Sometimes if I have a particular idea, but I mean, come on, man. This is you right behind here.
You're not a person of strong opinions, Kwanza.
All right, so now I'm being called out on occasion, but for the most part, like with Jamal, I'm pretty loose. I just kind of like tell him what's, you know, this is what's going on in the page, and he pretty much dictates what's going to happen and stuff. With Khary, maybe sometimes I just do it to mess with you, so whatever.
So once these guys, along the process, once these guys talk and figure out the story, it usually comes to me, and I paint the picture. So say me and Kwanza will talk, and he'll say, this is the idea I have for this story. What can you do with it? And then I look at it and say, all right, how can I approach it? And how can I create art that best fulfills his goals as a writer? So you'll notice the art for black and white has a very specific look to it. It's a little more gritty, it's more street arty. It's got a very specific palette, because I'm trying to tell a very specific thing. A lot of it is very serious things that we're saying in the book. And so I wanted to approach it as such. I wouldn't draw this the same way I draw Spider-Man. So with every different project, I'm trying to approach it not from, you know, how to put my style on it. I want to respect the vision of the author and bring their vision forth on the paper or the digital paper or whatever, you know. So yeah, I'm a servant to the story first, and the art kind of wraps around that.
So the comics that we're surrounded by in this room, they serve both as entertainment as well as a form of cultural and political commentary, which is what you guys were just bringing up. What's been the overall reception you guys have gotten for this work?
Mostly positive, I'd say. I think when you create work that is provocative, you have to expect a little bit of a pushback now and then. And so specifically with a book like Black, there's been pushback.
To be specific.
You know what? I'm gonna let Kwanza handle that, because Kwanza gets most of the pushback because he's a little more vocal about his opinions than I am. I would say the work tends to, it's our job to provoke a reaction, and we get those reactions. Usually positive, sometimes not so positive, but you wouldn't be doing this kind of stuff if you didn't want a reaction. The worst thing you could have as an artist or creator is no reaction at all. So I'd much rather some people like it and some people hate it than no reaction. But I would say in general, the work we do, it speaks to different audiences, but I would like to think, it's mostly positive.
Yeah, for the most part, when we first did Black, which is 2-3 years ago we launched that, I would say it was 100% positive. And if I were to put like a pinpoint on when we started hearing more negative stuff, it was after who got into the White House. That's when we started hearing more like, backlash and stuff, which is like, oh, you guys are late. This book has been out for a while. Like, what's got you all riled up? But I think overall, like the people who we've met in person, have always been really positive about it. They've seen a lot of like what I think we saw coming up in the industry where, people have said the same thing to me that I had said to my predecessors, where it's just like, I didn't see myself in comics before I saw this, which, it's kind of heartbreaking because I think there's like a 10-year gap between those two things, but that's still a positive because it's like, all right, well, like I'm carrying a baton, like I'm, representing and stuff like that. So I think overall, positive. The negative stuff, you can just kind of like put that on mute. There's blockchain now on Twitter. Just turn it on. Go about your life.
Yeah, so 3 years ago, I was a senior editor at Lionforge, and we launched a multicultural superhero universe called Catalyst Prime. And for me, that was giving Milestone back to comics. When Milestone stopped publishing consistently in 1997, the company stories would pop up now and again at DC. And when Dwayne McDuffie passed away in, I believe it was 2011, there was something that was happening in comic books where the black voice was once again being marginalized. And it was as if the death of this great figure was being used to usher in the death of black expression in mainstream comics. And there was truly something missing. So Catalyst Prime was to give fans that back, that every month they could find stories of characters that looked like them or their friends or their parents. And the response was actually pretty positive. And one of the reasons it was positive is because when you're a person of color, your efforts are expected to be lesser than, because you are generally seen as lesser than. So that gives you an amazing opportunity to surprise people with quality and imagination. So when the books came out and they really hit like a jackhammer, people were surprised and fans were happy to see that again. And the dialogue, the kind of dialogue that was happening with Milestone, the kind of dialogue that was happening when Static Shock was a regular weekly cartoon, these conversations were happening again, and now we have social media. So these conversations were happening in real time. And so that was pretty exciting to kind of get those kinds of dialogues going again on a more consistent basis. And it really speaks to what Kwanza said, which was like the 10-year gap, where things were just kind of weird and there was no watershed moment of cultural expression. Now you're seeing them happen a bit more with characters like Miles Morales, Kamala Khan, Moon Girl and Double Dinosaur, and I would hope at least half the people in this room read House of X and Powers of 10. And from Marvel, so these conversations are now being galvanized again. They're becoming more frequent. And so that leads to more conversation, and that is turning out to be positive in a good way. When you're talking about like any negative retractors, it's similar to what Khary said, where the worst possible result of art would be to have no response. So even a negative response is a positive, because that means there's a conversation happening, and that means there's a dialogue, and you can convince someone to see things in another way.
So I kind of want to unpack that just a little bit more. So what have been your experiences addressing race in comic stories with mainstream publishers versus independent publishers? Is there, and how has this changed over time?
Right, so first, interesting, because when I had come up with the idea for Black 10 years prior to us launching it, and when we did put it out into the world, people felt like it was really timely, and we were like, no, black people have been getting shot for much longer than like right now. You just have like Facebook and Twitter, so you see it a lot more. But when it came to like publishers being ready for the idea, I knew that they wouldn't be, which is why I went to Kickstarter and did it. And I even did like a little test at DC where I like, let an editor see it and it's just like, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And he's like, no. I do not think that our company would be ready for this sort of comic book. It's just like, and I knew it too, but it's like, the person I'm imitating does not talk like that. But I just felt like, paraphrasing a little bit. But I did that sort of as a litmus test, and also for myself, because I was like, well, I trusted that one particular editor, and I just wanted to see if it's like, is this even like a good idea? And it was the fact that I bothered that person, like that they were a bit disturbed by it, and I was like, might be onto something. Let's go and put this out into the world and see if it resonates with people. But I also felt that independent was the only way to tell that story, because you do have a lot of that resistance at large companies, and sometimes it's not even about race. It's about the corporate goals, where it's like, hey, we can't pursue this because of who we are, and this just isn't our lane or our story to tell. And then then there's also just general cowardice. But, yeah.
So more freedom.
So I'll tell a quick story which will speak to this. So I worked at DC Comics in the Batman department from '98 to 2000. We did a big year-long event called No Man's Land. During that time, we introduced an Asian Batgirl named Cassandra Cain. The best Batgirl. And executives fought it. They fought it tooth and nail. They said, Batgirl is Caucasian and a redhead. And that was it. They fought it. No Man's Land turned out to be the most lucrative event for the company in 1999, and they had no business choice but to do a Batgirl series with Cassandra Cain as Batgirl. That lasted for a number of years, and Cassandra Cain has never gotten that name back again, but she is still very much in the comics, to the point where in February, you're gonna see a film called Birds of Prey, and Cassandra is in there. And so, you have to fight against comfort. And sometimes the only way that you can do it is by proving that discomfort can be profitable, right? So Cassandra Cain became Batgirl because the fans said, we love this character, right? That's why it happened. I don't think it was because of altruism, it was because of money. But that led this character to become part of the fabric. And so sometimes, as with Kwanza's case, when the system refuses discomfort, you have to prove that discomfort is profitable outside of the system. Sometimes you have to prove that it's profitable within it. But that's how I've encountered race a lot in corporate companies, where no one wants to engage race, but everyone wants to engage profit.
Yeah, that was good, man.
It's a true story.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I mean, they handled it. I think what I have noticed since I work for both mainstream and independent companies, a lot of times the mainstream companies, they see diversity, or they treat it almost like it's a fad. So they'll test the waters with it, but they won't really commit to it. And so as a result, sometimes you're just like, you know what, if you really care about pushing that ledge forward a little bit, you gotta just go off and do it on your own. Because waiting for a giant billion-dollar company to hold your ideals is kind of foolish. You know, they're not about you, they're about the bottom line. And I'm not even anti-corporate companies, I'm just saying, if you have stories you want to tell that are a little more personal about what you're going through Marvel or DC is not necessarily the route you want to go. Control what you have and do it yourself.
So, what were your experiences like as creators of color coming up in the comics industry? And how has it changed now?
Why don't we go with me first?
You have something to say. Please.
Well, there's one thing that I definitely learned, and one of the things that inspired Black was, growing up as a comic book fan and as a comic book fan of color, you tend to only understand the world through the content that you're receiving. So, when Milestone appeared, I realized like, oh, there's people who look like me who are making comics and telling stories like, that are reflective of my culture and my background and are familiar to me and my friends. And it wasn't until I actually got a job in the comic industry at Marvel, and then later on at DC, that I kind of got a look behind the curtain, and saw that like, oh, the reason why I don't see myself in these comics is because there's no brothers here. Joe and I had this joke because he was at DC before I was there, and it was just like, well, they can't have too many of us there at the same time. It's like, and it is kind of true. It's like it's very subtle, and I don't think that it's like Machiavellian or anything like that. I just think it's a culture that's there, and you realize it when you are hearing ideas or trying to put ideas across, like you were doing with Batgirl, and you feel that resistance. Sometimes it's not just that it's like a personal comfort zone, it's just like a corporate culture where it's just like you're realizing it's like, oh, okay, I'm the only brown person in this room, that's why you don't get this. Like, and you're not gonna get it, so I either have to prove it with money or go do it by myself. So that's a lot of what I experienced in terms of like race and like, those sorts of things, because I don't think there's too many people who would be brave enough to just be upfront about it, but you guys might tell me some different stories.
Wow. So when I got into the business at Milestone, I feel like the industry did not take us seriously. Like the industry were like, oh, you're gonna be here for a quick minute, you're gonna disappear. And so we were looked at as redheaded stepchildren that are being tolerated for the progressive cause, and eventually, like a rubber band, reality will snap back to the way it was. Now it is understood that this is reality. And so what that means, interestingly enough and paradoxically enough in some ways, is that when you walk into a room, you have to be seen as someone that knows the job, that knows the culture of the company, that wants to be part of a larger idea. When you get in there, that's when, in the service of the company and the culture and the ideas, you can give opportunities to other people. You can find ways to introduce new ideas. You're not going to win every battle, but you can win a war over time. And so now we're taken seriously. Speaking of what Kwanza said, yes, there is still like an institutional conscious or subconscious that I think will only allow a certain percentage of people of color into any given organization, or else they might feel that an agenda or a mentality will take over that organization. But the fact of the matter is, what it all comes down to is, everyone has the right to tell stories, everyone has the right to be heard. So basically what we're trying to achieve here is creating equality of opportunity.
I did just remember one thing though, because how Khary and I actually met in the industry is because people used to confuse us. And it was like, hey Khary, what's going on? I'm like,
We look just alike, right?
nah.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, look, you have mad questions, so I want to make sure we get through all of it.
That's fine, that's fine. So, Mike. All right. So, is the idea of authenticity, and I think the answer to this is obviously yes, if the idea of authenticity is important to you, what do you do to ensure it? I know, Joe, I know you work on projects that are based on inclusion. You're working with not just the Black experience, but with all different kinds of people. How do you ensure that the stories you tell are authentic? And that goes to all of you guys.
Well, I can talk to that. I can talk to that through an example. So, I've noticed a lot of times when I get hired for jobs at the bigger companies, it's usually because they don't want to use this term, but I'm like the diversity hire. I'm brought in to make sure that, we fulfill a certain quota. I've noticed that a few times. So if I'm going to be the diversity hire, I feel as though I can't just represent like black people. I gotta represent it for everybody. So that comes in certain ways. Like, I'll give an example where I was brought onto a book from Marvel a couple years ago, and the writer, he wrote a scene where he wanted to portray some Latin teens in New York City, and he wanted them to be riding around Queens in a lowrider, and they were using like West Coast slang, and I was like, bruh, nah, that's not New York. Like, you know, and I had to be like, look, first of all, I'm like, I'm not Hispanic myself, but I have enough friends, and I'm like, I know this slang is wrong. So I went to a Puerto Rican friend of mine, and I go, yo, how would people say this? And he went through the entire script and went over it and was like, nah, I would never say that. No one talks like that. Put this in, put this out. And then I looked at it and I was like, well, I went to my editors and I said, look, what he's portraying is a very like West Coast Mexican culture. And if we draw that and I'm the Mr. Diversity, I'm gonna get that heat. And y'all don't want that. So change all of this. And that's the thing where it's like, yeah, you know, I was brought in for something, so let me be that something. Let me tell y'all why all of this is wrong and why you need to fix that. And that was one of those things where I was like, I can't just rep this. I gotta represent something bigger than this, because a lot of people don't get these opportunities. So I feel the need to, it's beyond me at this point.
Did your friend get credit for writing that dude's script for him?
Of course he did. My friends? Yeah. Oh, no, of course not.
So maintaining authenticity. Something Khary pointed out, absolutely, seeking out other voices from communities that you don't represent. The fact that when you become an advocate for race, you're actually not even just becoming an advocate for race, you're becoming an advocate for the other. You're becoming the advocate for everything that is not white, male, heterosexual with all working limbs. So, and that is a lot. So, when I was at DC, I was an editor for a title called Birds of Prey. And one of the main characters of Birds of Prey, Barbara Gordon, who was Oracle, is a wheelchair user. And so I got into these debates with high-ranking people who did not think that wheelchair users would be able to physically defend themselves. Did not think that a woman as a wheelchair user would wear anything that wasn't a flat sneaker. Like why would they wear heels? Their feet never touch the ground. And it's like, wow, you don't know many women, do you? So right. So when I got on Birds of Prey, I was like, holy Toledo! Like, I now have to be an advocate for how women are represented, how wheelchair users are represented, and so that actually is what happens. It doesn't just stay the one lane. It totally becomes the prism. Yeah? And the best thing that you can say to yourself, honestly, as a creator, as a business person, when it comes to something like this, the best thing you can say to yourself is, I don't know. Because if you can admit that you don't know, that means that you can seek the answers out from somewhere else. It's the people that think they know everything. They're like, oh, well, we're the same. If I think it, it must be true, right? Those are the real dangers to our society. Like, you have to be able to say to yourself, I don't know.
And that's just standard for being a writer or a storyteller. It's like, do your research. It doesn't matter what the topic is, whether it's in your lane or something like that. If you're like, you know, a woman and you're writing something about men that might not be in your lane, ask the dude next to you, you know? It's like, if you're queer and you're writing a straight story, ask your straight friends. It's not your lane. Like, that's perfectly fine. That's the job, you know? I do think it's funny though, and I'm sorry to like disrupt this question, but that always makes me laugh that whenever we're working in comic books, those end up being the walls that we hit in a world where a dude can put on a bat cape and swing from it's like, oh word, he can do that, but she can't wear heels in a wheelchair. That's where your brain hits a wall.
Like she can't wear heels, she can't know martial arts, although she was taught by one of the five best martial artists on the planet. Like she was taught by Richard effing Dragon. So it's like she knows how to use eskrima sticks. So there was this whole big debate about, oh, this supervillain is gonna break into her lair and just totally beat her up. And I'm like, Oracle can fight. Do you not know this? Right? And yeah, so like you said, like the suspension of disbelief is easy when it comes to superpowers, but it's difficult when it comes to human powers. Right? That's an interesting paradox.
So, what responsibilities, if any, do you feel creators of color have to their community?
I think I can speak for myself, and I think it's changed for me over the years. When I first got in, I just thought that, you know, my presence was enough. Like if people just see me there, then then I'm doing my job. And I think everyone approaches this differently. There's not one way of approaching how to do this, but I do feel like as I've gotten older and I see the impact that my work has on people, I kind of embrace that it's not just about being there. You kind of have to push. You kind of have to be there. You know what I'm saying? Like it's, you have a responsibility to not only create a product that kind of says something, but also I feel an obligation to usher forward the next generation of creators so that their job is a little bit easier than the stuff that I have to go through. And same with the guys before me, you know. I was Joe's intern back in 1999. And I noticed that him and a few of the guys, they took care of me and they made sure that, you know, I was moving in the right direction with my art. And so now that I'm of a certain age, that I'm also doing my job to make sure that the next generation of creators are also on their A game as well.
Here.
But for me, I'm just on my Jordan Peele. I had like a moment recently where I was looking over like a lot of ideas that I was dusting off, and I just came to that realization where I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to put out more of the same in the world anymore. Like everything is going to be of color for me. Like everything is for me is, you know, going to be like female or LGBTQ, because there's just not enough of it. And if I have that lane and that platform to like bring more of that to the forefront, I'm just going to do it instead of like, you know, contributing. Like I'm not going to do James Bond. Like that's just not. There's enough of that. You know, we don't need more of it. It's already there.
What Khary said about having a presence, what Kwanza said about representation and material, and again, what you said about, you know, bringing up the next generation. So we do need more mentors. We need more mentors in creative businesses, and part of mentorship, and this is gonna sound contradictory, and this is gonna say harsh. This is gonna sound harsh. Don't give your fellow brother or sister a pass, right? Like, you have to be good, because when I present you and these 5 people want to say, oh, you're just hooking that person up because that person is black, I want to be able to show that you are good, right? That your work supersedes where you were raised, what your experiences are. You have this level of skill. So that was, you know, done to me. And so part of mentorship, part of bringing up the next generation is training of standard. And we cannot be afraid to push one another to standards. Because everything we put out until this earth comes to an end is going to be criticized, it's going to be seen as lesser than, until we can prove that it is more than. Once we can prove that it's greater, that it's more important, that it is necessary, that's when more of it breaks through. And you mentioned Jordan Peele. That's what he did. Like, he spent his time in the system, but he was working on something and get outcomes, and honestly, life changes. There is the time before Get Out, and there's the time after Get Out. That is a demarcation line in our global culture. Part of that is because it was good, and no one can say it wasn't.
So you guys brought up the idea of mentorship, so we're gonna go there with this. What advice do you have for newbie artists or writers beginning their first storytelling or comics project?
Khary?
I think all of you guys can speak to this.
One, don't suck. That's like the most important thing, because, you know,
First.
still don't suck. Gonna be good, sorry. The reality is, obviously, you want to focus on your talent first. Talent's important, but also the thing that keeps you here is, I would say, is having a voice. And your voice it evolves over time, obviously, so you don't come out fully formed saying, yo, I got this thing to say. But I would say that having a voice and something to say makes you stick out from the crowd, because no matter what, there are thousands of people lobbying for these spots that we have every day. And it's not even just like in the United States, this is like a global thing now. So you're competing against every other person trying to do this kind of thing. So you don't have to be the best, but you have to say something that is so specific to what you do that can't nobody get in your lane. And I think that's been crucial to my career. It's just being a little bit left. If you see everyone else doing this, maybe go to the right, do this thing over here. And I think that is it's important to longevity.
What was the question again?
So my question was about, for a newbie writer or artist who's beginning their first storytelling or their first comics project, what advice would you give them?
If you're working on something, you should also be studying constantly. You know, reading other people's stuff, taking classes, like refining your craft, like always trying to improve. But also, you are in a much better position than I think all of us were when we first got started. Because, like I said, I came up with the idea for Black 10 years ago, and part of the reason why I didn't do it then was it was just a different era. We didn't have things like Kickstarter back then. We didn't have social media where we could like really elevate the idea and it could, you know, go viral and capture attention. I think that's a different landscape. So I'm very much more of the like independent route. If you have an idea and a story that's in you, you now have many more like avenues for like getting that story out there and getting it in front of people and connecting with them and like finding an audience. So I would say that like when you feel like you're ready, just put it out there. And if you stumble, like that's a good thing, because when we put Blackout, like that was literally going to be my test for the concept. I was like, cool, Kickstarter makes sense. This is a stupid idea. We won't make any money. And oh no, give this up. This is dumb. But it went the other way, and I was like, oh, okay, all right. I must be onto something here. So I think that is like a much different landscape than the old days of like, going to conventions or like getting an agent or like pitching like a publisher or like a publishing house. Like, I don't want to say you don't have to do that. Now that's just one avenue. There's many more ways that you can actually like get your stories out there.
Yeah. Well, first piece of advice, that's really tough. I think it would be, whether it's a writer or an artist, I think it would be show me a story you love. Tell me why you love it. And when you can identify those qualities, bring those qualities to your work. If you love a story because this particular character was so real, okay, why? Because life is hard for them. They're not perfect. Tell me how. And as we start drilling more and more down into it, you're going to start understanding that you get story more than you realize. Like, story is part of our DNA. We're dealing with it every day. We actually know the code, but we have to really learn the vocabulary. So, and as an artist, show me something visual that you love. It doesn't even have to be a comic book. It could be a movie. It could be a single piece of artwork. But those qualities that you admire in this other material, figure out the way to bring those qualities to your material. Figure out a way to create a character that I will fall in love with or that will break my heart. Figure out a way to create a visual where people are like, I don't know what that is, but I can't stop looking at it. Or I want that in my house. Figure that out. Like analyze something good and then use that as the starting point to bring good to your work.
So that leads us to what kind of projects do you want to be working on? What stories excite you? What do you look for when taking on a new title or a new project?
I would say, so I spent the first, I started in 2003, so I spent the first 12 to 13 years of my career creating artwork that I thought the masses wanted. And I was trying to please, my editors and the fans. So I was doing stuff, I wanted to draw Spider-Man and Batman and all that stuff. That's all cool. But I would say actually, Black might have been the turning point for me, where I realized that that once again, your voice actually matters, and how it affects people. Like it's not just about you. And so since we worked on this book, I realized it was more important to really tell stories that were important to me. So before I was thinking about pleasing other people, now I'm more about telling stories that I think are not being told right now and that no one else can tell but me. And I think that's, I already forgot the question, to be honest with you. But basically, I'm here to, with Excellence, I think that was a big first step for me, where we do things in this book that, it's simple things like a grandmother cutting the kid's hair in a barbershop and having barbershop talk. That's something that I had never seen in a comic book before. And it's little touches like that that spoke to me, and I said, well, if I've never seen it before, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of other people that have never seen it before. And so it's like little touches like that that I feel like we're doing things that I could never get away with in a Marvel or DC comic book, and I'm looking to explore that side of my career more now.
Yeah, I'd say that's the same for me. Like, I've got a dozen different genres and story ideas in my head, but all of them are me exploring those territories from a different perspective and in a different lane. It's like looking at what's out there and saying, like, what's absent here for me, and it's probably absent for somebody else. So let me fill in these blanks, because if it's resonating inside me to tell a story and fill in that blank, then somebody's more than likely going to be like, oh yeah, I'm glad that like somebody finally did that or put that out there.
I want to continue to work on, for me, like, the interesting themes are character journeys and transformation. So, like, my life was changed when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. And Malcolm X was truly a study in the capacity for human transformation. he transformed, I think, 3 different times in one lifetime. And it was a lifetime that was really cut short by violence. So the capacity of the human to transform, character journeys are interesting to me. So as an editor, those are the stories that I want to continue to work on. Like, I'm not interested in like a gimmick pitch, and I'm not interested in something that I've already seen. Like, so if you tell me something like the X-Men but rich, like, I don't care about that. In some ways, right? Like, but you know, like, tell me something else. So a real character story, that's what I want to work on. And for me, you know, I've decided I want to be greedy. So in addition to being an editorial director, I really want to spend maybe the next 10 years of my life really writing, really doing more writing. You know, works like Black, works like Excellence. I was just catching up with both of them this week, and those are such unique visions. And the opportunity to do that and share them with the world is both nerve-wracking and exciting at the same time. And so I'm actually working on a historical fiction graphic novel right now that will be coming out next year. It'll probably be announced next month. But what was exciting about it for me was there was a person on a journey. They attempted to do the impossible. And that's really exciting, because even if you fail, you tried to do the impossible. The worst thing would be to never try. And you end up, you're 65 years old, you're 70 years old, and you're like, damn, I never took a chance. As painful as it is to take a chance, it is so exciting and exhilarating to just jump off the ledge. So those are the kind of stories that interest me, and those are the kind of stories I want to tell alongside these gentlemen here.
So we just have time for a couple more questions, and then I'm going to open that up to Q&A from the audience. What are you reading right now, and what should we all be reading right now?
I think we already said House of X.
Well, we're all, yeah, you gotta be reading, you have to go through House of X and Powers of 10.
So, I'm gonna be honest with y'all, I don't read a lot because I'm really busy creating this stuff all the time. So, the one comic book I have read, there's 2 actually that I read in the last 6 months that were that blew my mind. One was House of X, Powers of, that's incredible. There's another book I read called These Savage Shores,
Yes.
from Vault Comics,
Yes.
and it's all about vampires, the New World, and I wasn't ready for how good that book was gonna be, and so I would recommend that book. But yeah, I ain't reading much these days.
Yeah, I think it's kind of spotty for me too. Same thing with TV and Netflix. It's when I find time, it's just a binge. Another book I like from Vault is Heathen. Heathen is some stuff too. That's a really.
And they're gonna make Heathen into a film, actually.
Yeah.
Kathleen Hardwick is directing it. Yeah.
So that's another good one and stuff. But it's hard sometimes to find time, you know.
Yeah, who's got it?
I mean, in terms of reading, honestly, I buy more comics than I have the time to read. That's a problem. I gotta work on that. I buy more books than I have the time to read. Honestly, and I also have this problem where I read a bunch of different books at once. It's what am I in the mood to read today? So I'm reading the biography of Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. I'm reading, let me see, in terms of comics, you mentioned These Savage Shores, which is really good. I'm reading Deathstroke by DC Comics, because what's interesting about that is the character is an assassin, and this is the first time that the character has been written as a bad guy, and it's an examination of how do people who do bad things continue to get away with doing it. And he's a father. He's the worst father in the world. So it's actually not even a story about an assassin. It's a story about the most dysfunctional family in the world. It's about the Wilson family. And it's about how a terrible human being damages his daughter and his son and his wife, and how our actions have these ripple legacy effects. And half of our lives we're spending trying to escape the legacies
that have been imprinted on us by our parents or society or other things. So I kind of find that thematically interesting. I am reading Excellence.
Interesting.
I think so. It's pretty amazing. An amazing story, especially about father and son relationships.